miss is one of those words that just seems very passive and also just feels like it kind of like takes the narrative framework of a battle and just kind of like drops it on its face like a wet towel on the on the battlefield that you just kind of like watch just flop there and just sit there just big and wet in a towel. You don't want that. You don't want that, Alex.
There's one of your clips somewhere in there.
Oh, there's a big wet towel just being a big wet towel, I'll tell you. The one more thing I wanted to discuss with you came from me scrolling endlessly on the internet, which I do quite a bit.
Yeah, which we all do.
We all do, but I wasn't doom scrolling, I was DM scrolling, and I came across a Reddit, subreddit actually, called DM Academy, and it gave me some different ideas and threads. The basic idea of that subreddit is different people that run games giving advice and asking for ideas to deal with typical problems that they have. And so one thing came along, and I did have it, I took a screenshot so that I could remember it, but it was about a player who just found something that hit them the wrong way when their dungeon master said that the player missed on an attack. And so when the tables were turned and they actually got to DM a game, they said, I'll just read from what they wrote. My DM was a player, and I told him I was going to attempt the same creative narrative approach he had tried. I had a post-it note on the back of my DM screen, and all it said was, "The players never miss." We got into our first combat, and I couldn't have asked for a better chance to practice. 2 of our party never scored a hit, and I didn't roll very well myself, so I went to work narrating 3 level 2 characters fighting a small group of cultists. And so, bringing the battle to life despite low rolls, creating an epic battle on accident. And one of the examples that they give is a miss equals you swing your great axe, but the cultist quickly steps to the side. He whips his scimitar through the air and pushes your great axe away. Your great axe smashes through the floorboards. Or, instead of miss, you fire an arrow from across the room. The arrow arches expertly through the beams and hanging herbs in the kitchen. The cultist moves away from the barbarian's great axe, coincidentally stepping aside as the arrow whizzes past his ear. He shoots you a look of mixed shock and relief. A couple little examples there. The reason why that came up is because if you just tell a player you missed the attack, that doesn't really make much sense, does it? Like you were mentioning before.
In a lot of cases, it wouldn't necessarily make sense, but I mean, yes, you can absolutely miss somebody, but I tend to agree that you don't often miss completely.
Yeah.
Especially in melee combat.
Yes. Yeah. I think that one of the problems that you might experience is that if you keep having places where you miss, like you literally like, oops, I hit over here, ooh, it doesn't really lend itself to the, you're the heroes of the story. You would certainly think that adventurers that are going on this, journey would not constantly be like flubbing hitting something with a sword or a spear. Especially when you get to very large enemies, that chances are has a very high AC if they're large enemies like dragons. You would think it'd be very hard for, well, even ranged combatants and, magic users to, like, miss something that's the size of a building.
Yeah, and that's one example I tend to use is the dragon one. It's, if you're in melee combat with a dragon...
Yeah.
You're probably not going to miss the creature with your weapon.
No.
You might, however, not hit it very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unless you're rolling a critical failure, I'm probably not going to say you missed a dragon. Later on in the D&D campaign we're in, you guys are, I believe, should be fighting a dragon. And you're probably not going to miss it,
Right.
but you may not do damage to it when you attack it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's similar to when you guys fought the werewolves. I didn't say you missed it because
Yeah.
you guys were hitting it, but it was immune to your damage.
Right.
So like you hit it, but it doesn't get much purchase. Or in the dragon sense, you could be like, you swing your sword and the scales deflect the blow, or they take the brunt of the damage, or you could do any other description that is not miss. You were absolutely hitting this dragon with your sword,
Yes.
and this dragon is giving 0 shits.
Yep, it does not care. I think one of the easy ways to get around that, if you're new to, dungeoneering or whatever, is to think about the nature of like creatures and armor and chitin or natural armor or anything like that, and realize that there are, especially when you see like a paladin's armor or anything like that, there are going to be areas that are much thicker than others, and you would imagine that if you happen to hit the parts that are thicker, that you're not going to really do anything. If you hit like the pauldrons on the shoulders of somebody, it's probably not going to do very much when those like big thick heavy pauldrons are there. You hit it, but it's not going to do much. But if you roll well enough that you get past the AC class, maybe you hit like across the belly or something like that. You hit in between the armor, and that's why it does damage. It's not inconceivable to think that like AC has to be thought of in Dungeons and Dragons less as, what kind of armor you have, but realistically just, what's the likelihood that you're actually going to end up doing damage to the creature when you attack them.
Right.
And so for some small creatures that have high AC, it's because they're agile. That's why dexterity as a modifier usually goes to your AC. Because it's about sidestepping the damage. It's about getting out of the way of your damage when it happens. The orc comes up to you and swings, and yeah, it technically misses by the, mechanics of the game, but realistically, it's just so much more interesting to say that, your dexterous nature causes you to lean back as the sword whips across you, and it only just scuffs the surface of your leather armor, something to that effect. It's not really that the enemies missed or you missed, but did it actually do anything? And I understand the reason why that was a problem. Miss is one of those words that just seems very passive, and also just feels like it kind of takes the narrative framework of a battle and just kind of drops it on its face like a wet towel on the on the battlefield that you just kind of watch just flop there and just sit there just big and wet in a towel. You don't want that. You don't want that, Alex.
There's one of your clips somewhere in there.
Oh, there's a big wet towel just being a big wet towel, I'll tell you. Just how sometimes they say that, wet towels are like wet towels. They're wet towels occasionally.
I think you're done with this analogy now.
Yeah, I don't think it's technically analogy if you've just analogized it with itself. Anyway, so if people are not necessarily comfortable with getting into the narrative structure or the flowery language, is there a simpler way that they might be able to address not hitting an armor class, not making a successful attack, that's just quicker but doesn't feel as passive and deflating as miss?
You could say that the armor negates their damage.
Sure.
For instance, Divine Purchase. You could just use miss and not be pedantic.
Yes.
It really depends on the level of narration you want to put into it.
Yeah.
If you are new and you think it's easier to just say, hey, yeah, your sword misses, or you don't meet their AC, is another simple way that's just straightforward.
Right.
If you don't want to go the full narration line because you're nervous, you're new to it, or whatever, or maybe it's just not your style, or maybe your players don't care, then that's fine. But if you want to be like, you swing your sword and the goblin ducks underneath it and like ducks underneath your sword and then comes at you and tries to stab you in the belly with its shank, for instance, you could do something like that as well. Again, it really depends on your style. It really depends on the level of narration your players want and you want to engage in. But finding creative ways to explain that and make it flow and feel cinematic is always fun. But it's not always necessary.
Yeah.
It can be really tiring to do that for every attack sometimes.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think something else that's kind of handy too is, let's say that the enemy has an AC of 15, and your player hits gets a 13. So you're close to the AC, but you probably don't want to just come out and say, oh no, the creature's AC is whatever. You don't really want to do that because that would be too metagaming, and we don't really want to assign numbers to the enemies. It breaks up the cinematic quality. I would probably say something to the similar like, well, that's not quite going to do. Like, just kind of give the idea that it's close, but not really going to do anything. To give people at least an idea of the numbers that they're supposed to be hitting in order for this to work. Just something a little bit simpler without doing too much metagaming and bringing too many of the mechanics themselves into the actual narration of the game. But then again, if you want to go full on, Homeric tradition of espousing the Great Odyssey, I mean, go for it. You can. But avoiding the word miss specifically, just because I think it can be a little too short and nondescript.
I was gonna go with misleading.
There you go. It's misleading. Because the heroes really shouldn't be missing attacks, so to speak.
Maybe they're not heroes. Maybe they're anti-heroes.
Anti-heroes also usually don't miss attacks, though.
Maybe they're villains.
Maybe they're just bad at their job.
The point is, a adequately seasoned adventurer who has training probably shouldn't be missing a whole lot.
Yes. Unless they're a stormtrooper.
Yeah, then they miss all their shots.
Then that's like that's narratively correct, is that the stormtroopers.
The title of this segment is you miss 100% of the shots you don't make.
Yes, exactly.
And 200% of the shots if you're a stormtrooper.
Exactly. I am actually kind of surprised when it came to the stormtroopers that they didn't end up shooting themselves more than the rebels.
Listen, the clone troopers were phenomenal.
Yeah, why'd they get rid of those? Oh, well, budget cutbacks?
Jedi cutbacks.
Jedi cutbacks, yeah.